HMHS Britannic here, and a nice live stream. So let's get into it.
This is the story of the British ocean liner Britannic. Built and launched. This is the story of the British ocean liner Britannic. Built and launched after the tragic loss of her sister ship, the famous Titanic. As one of the finest vessels of her era, the Britannic never crossed the Atlantic carrying the rich and the poor to the New World. During World War I, she was converted into a hospital ship and made 6 voyages into the Mediterranean, evacuating thousands of wounded soldiers from the eastern Mediterranean battlefields. Despite being considered more unsinkable than the Titanic, she was lost in only 55 minutes. At 10 a.m. on the morning of the 21st of June 1911, the White Star Line's brand new steamer RMS Olympic had just docked at Pier 59 in New York. With an overall length of 882 feet or 269 metres and at 45,324 gross tonnes, Olympic was ushering in a new age of transatlantic travel. 4 years earlier, it had all been so different, with Cunard's Lusitania and Mauretania taking the plaudits as both the largest and fastest passenger ships in the world. The White Star Line reputation for comfort and reliability was under immense pressure, and if they were not to be eclipsed, then the company had little option but to respond. It had taken almost 4 years, but the net result was that the Harland and Wolff shipyard at Belfast had been massively upgraded with 2 new giant slipways, and the Belfast Harbour Commissioners had constructed a new graving dock to accommodate a new generation of White Star ships.
We know you're hovering over that button, but we need your help. We have a better button, we promise.
The original strategy had been to construct 2 giant vessels, Olympic and Titanic. These 2 ships would not only offer the height of luxury for passengers on the North Atlantic, but would also provide a new standard of service for the hundreds of thousands of European emigrants on their way to America. Service for the hundreds on the North Atlantic. These 2, Olympic and Titanic. The original strategy had been to construct 2 giant vessels, Olympic and Titanic. These 2 ships would not only offer the height of luxury for passengers on the North Atlantic, but would also provide a new standard of service for the hundreds and thousands of European emigrants on their...
There's gonna be like part 3 or part 6 since I probably won't get through the video since it's a 56 minutes.
...way to America. Although not capable of matching the Cunard sisters in terms of speed, with a service speed of 21 knots, the Olympic-class ships were still fast, and would be more than capable of maintaining a respectable, comfortable, and most important of all, economic service between Southampton and New York. Ismay's cable home that day did little to conceal his delight with the company's new vessel, describing the Olympic as a marvel. But Ismay also knew that although the White Star Line was once again in the ascendant, there was little time for the company to rest on its laurels. Cunard was clearly aware of the potential of a ship of this class. They too had begun to explore the possibilities of constructing their own version. Less than a week after the launch of Titanic, the first keel plates of Cunard's Aquitania had already been laid. And with Albert Barling's Hamburg America line also planning an even larger trio of ships, the competition was already hot. Up to this point, a third Olympic-class vessel had simply not been an option for the White Star Line. But in 3 years since Olympic and Titanic had been ordered, the commercial realities have changed dramatically, and with the public response to the Olympic being so positive, the need to build a third ship of the class in order to comfortably maintain a weekly service between Southampton and New York became greater than ever. It is against this background that Britannic was conceived. The contract for the ship's construction would not be finalised until the 23rd of October 1911. But with both of the large slipways at Belfast already occupied, there was little need to rush. In the meantime, Harland and Wolff could begin to stockpile the materials and allocate the necessary resources. But on the 28th of June 1911, exactly 1 week after the Olympic arrived at New York, the official order to proceed was given. Even before the Olympic had returned to Southampton, Ismay was considering a number of improvements to be incorporated into Titanic. The most noticeable modifications will be a larger number of cabins along the B-deck promenade. Other modifications would include a larger first-class restaurant, a veranda cafe, and an enclosed forward A-deck promenade.
Yep. The top one is Olympic and the bottom one is Titanic. That's for the ship down in the Atlantic Ocean is closed windows. So these.
Throughout the summer of 1911, those modifications would be incorporated into Titanic while still fitting out at Belfast. But it would not be until the launch of the Royal Mail steamer Arlanza on the 23rd of November 1911 that the necessary space needed for the construction of a third Olympic-class liner was available. 1 week later, on the 30th of November, the keel yard of yard number 433 Britannic was finally laid on slip number 2 at Belfast. On the 25th of November 1911, the New York Times had picked up a story in the British press, speculating that the new ship, to be called Gigantic, would be 1,000 feet or 300 metres long and 112 feet or 34 metres wide.
No.
Intriguingly, the on-board facilities would include a cricket field, a tennis court, golf links, and even a ballroom. Although the White Star Line and the Harland and Wolff shipyards always denied it, some sources say that the ship was supposed to be named Gigantic. A copy of the Harland and Wolff order book dated October 1911, about 6 months before the Titanic disaster, already shows the name Britannic.
Yep.
Some handwritten changes were added to the order book and dated January 1912. These only dealt with the ship's moulded width and January Britannic. 6 months before the type of the Harland and Wolff order book dated October 1911, about 6 months before the Titanic disaster, the order book and dated January, not her name. To this day, some persist in the width and not her name. To this day, the ship's moulded width and not her name.
Sorry.
To this day, some persist in the belief that the ship's name was clandestinely changed because the original choice was pretentious and, in unfortunate circumstances, also extremely embarrassing. But the documented evidence disproves this theory. While it is still possible that the name Gigantic was originally intended for the liner, the above does dispel the notion that a potential name change resulted from the Titanic disaster, as the shipyard had already listed the name as Britannic before her sister ship sank. The initial pace of work on Britannic was swift enough, with the hull being framed to the height of the double bottom by the 12th of March 1912, but already behind the scene a number of issues were beginning to materialise. In January 1912, the Olympic had experienced particularly heavy 1912, but already behind the scene a number of issues were beginning to materialise. In January 1912, the Olympic had experienced particularly heavy Atlantic crossing, which had highlighted serious issues in a number of the ship's riveted seams. When the vessel was dry docked at the beginning of March 1912 in order to have a propeller blade replaced, the opportunity was taken, therefore, to replace and strengthen a number of riveted seams. Furthermore, a number of small cracks were observed in the superstructure in the vicinity of some of the deck houses at the level of B-deck, and also in the area of the aft expansion joints. It was the first sign that perhaps all was not well with the design of the Olympic-class vessels. But although this was not necessarily taken to be unexpected in view of the huge technological leap that Harland and Wolff had taken, even at this stage, the learning curve in the operation of Olympic and the soon-to-be completed Titanic would result in a number of significant redesigns to Britannic. Nevertheless, even by January 1912, the evident movement in flexing in Olympic's hull, along with the evident fatigue being caused by the flexing in the top structure, was of enough concern for Britannic's engineering records to include an important modification, increasing the breadth of the vessel by 18 inches. At some later date, further modification would also be made to Britannic's superstructure, which would incorporate 3 expansion joints instead of the 2 in Olympic and Titanic, in order to help distribute the topside flexing over as large an area as possible. But all of this was nothing as compared to what came next. Less than 2 weeks after departing from Belfast, shortly before midnight on the 14th of April 1912, RMS Titanic struck an iceberg on her maiden voyage. 2 hours and 20 minutes later, the ship disappeared beneath the surface of an unusually tranquil Atlantic Ocean, taking with her 1,503 passengers and crew. The 14th of April 1912, RMS Titanic struck an iceberg beneath the surface of an unusually tranquil Atlantic Ocean, taking... As the 712 survivors were landed at New York, the world was already hungry for answers. And the Americans would waste no time, with Joseph Bruce Ismay being called before the Senate Committee inquiry being chaired by William Alden Smith, the Republican senator for Michigan. Smith acted quickly, and his report was completed less than 6 weeks after the disaster, with Lord Mersey's British report following 2 months later. Each report was strikingly different in many ways, but the overall conclusions in both were undeniable. Smith and Mersey agreed on the crucial steps that needed to be taken in order to ensure a greater safety at sea, with both recommending increased watertight subdivision and, more importantly, sufficient lifeboat capacity for everyone on board.
If Titanic's bulkheads was never low to E deck and it was at B deck, Titanic would have never sunk.
Both the White Star Line and Harland and Wolff would be crunching numbers of their own in order to restore their battered reputations. White Star could take steps to ensure that adequate temporary lifeboat capacity could be installed on the Olympic.
We can still go.
Although that was of little benefit in the short term, as the Stokehold crew, uncertain of the safety of the additional collapsible lifeboat, mutinied on the 24th of April, and declined to sail on the ship's next scheduled crossing from Southampton to New York. Unable to reach a compromise, 2 days later the voyage was cancelled, and Olympic remained at Southampton until her next scheduled crossing on the 15th of May. As far as Britannic was concerned, the uncertainty was even greater, with rumours circulating that White Star would cancel the project altogether. However, the commercial realities rendered such an option unlikely. No matter how great the disaster, there was no way that White Star could maintain a balanced express service between New York and Southampton with the Oceanic and the aging Majestic running with Olympic.
And now, so there's an update. Unfortunately, they changed my schedule, so I didn't have to work this week. So I'll be working tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday.
On the other hand, it was also clear that wholesale alterations to certain aspects of the ship's design would need to be reconsidered. Work on yard number 433 was subsequently slowed. Britannic would be fully framed by the 27th of February 1913, approximately 50 weeks after completing the framing to the double bottom. However, considering that it had taken 46 weeks between completing the framing in Titanic's double bottom to the completion of the hull framing, in reality we are only talking a difference of about 4 weeks. Behind the scenes, however, the Harland and Wolff drawing office...
Operation knock out the Nakamov.
Give me 10 seconds.
Knock him out.
Operation knock out the Nakamov.
were working overtime. Externally, it would take a trained eye to spot subtle structural differences of the third, and, as it would turn out, final Olympic-class liner. But internally, Britannic would be a very different ship. An extra bulkhead was added in the electric engine room, dividing the ship into 17 compartments, as opposed to the 16 in Olympic and Titanic. But more importantly, 5 of these bulkheads now extended up as far as the bridge deck. To further add to Britannic's unsinkability credentials, a double skin would run alongside all 6 of the ship's boiler rooms, as well as the reciprocating and turbine engine rooms, for a total length of 447 feet, or 136 metres. As 1912 drifted into 1913, Britannic grew steadily on the stocks. By the 20th of September 1913, the hull was fully plated. And while structurally the ship was significantly different to the original design, at the same time much of the internal working layout of the ship would be identical to that in Olympic and Titanic. The 6 boiler rooms still contained 24 double-ended and 5 single-ended boilers, with a total of 159 furnaces. The only real difference was that in Britannic, the double-ended boilers were 1 foot longer. The engine room arrangements were also practically identical, with 2 4-cylinder inverted triple expansion reciprocating engines exhausting into a low-pressure turbine. The design of Britannic's turbine engine, however, was considerably different. The turbine in Britannic had been designed and constructed by Harland and Wolff. Whereas those in Olympic and Titanic had been built by John Brown and Company. The real difference was in their size and power. The turbine in Olympic weighed 420 tons and could develop 16,000 horsepower, whereas the 490-ton turbine in Britannic was capable of developing 18,000 horsepower. All of this machinery combined meant that, with a total of 50,000 horsepower, Britannic was more than capable of maintaining her designed service speed at 21 knots. To the travelling public, Britannic would also incorporate the best features in Olympic and Titanic.
That's nice.
Already mentioned was the open promenade on B deck in Olympic, which Bruce Ismay had opted to fill with additional cabins in Titanic. But Britannic's internal arrangements would essentially be a hybrid version of the 2 earlier ships. An open B deck promenade would be filled with additional cabin space, including the 2 millionaires suites, which had been incorporated into Titanic. One of the key differences further aft was the first-class restaurant, which had proved so popular in Olympic. Britannic's restaurant would stretch from the port to starboard. Whereas in Titanic and subsequently in the modified Olympic, a Café Parisien had been installed on the starboard side of B deck. In Britannic there would be no such café, with the builders instead opting for the 2 existing veranda cafés on the aft boat deck. As in Titanic, Britannic's forward promenade on A deck would also be enclosed with sliding windows.
That's nice.
Other alteration windows. Britannic's forward promenade on A deck would also be enclosed with sliding windows.
But without the funnels on Britannic, she looks nice.
Other alterations in the internal arrangements included a children's playroom on the port boat deck, a hairdressing salon for the ladies next to the gentleman's barber on B deck, an additional first-class elevator amidships, and even an organ in the main first-class entrance.
That organ never made it to the top, to tank.
There was, however, one undeniable difference in the design of the three ships. Olympic and Titanic had originally been fitted with a single line of lifeboats along the forward and aft ends of the port and starboard boat decks. The loss of Titanic had highlighted the lack of lifeboat capacity, but while White Star had corrected this deficiency in Olympic by virtually enclosing the boat deck with a line of well-in lifeboat davits, in Britannic the builders had opted for an altogether different approach. There could be no doubt that safety had been made an absolute priority in Britannic, and any passenger staring at the planned 8 sets of huge lattice-girder davits would have little reason to doubt it. The February 1914 edition of Engineering magazine wrote that the davits could accommodate 48 lifeboats, although subsequent designs would indicate that the number had been reduced to 44. Pointing out that the huge size of the davits would enable them to lower the 34-foot lifeboats close to, or, if necessary due to any list, at a greater distance from the side of the ship. The stacked lifeboat arrangement on tiers at strategic areas of the boat deck also meant that the passengers could take their place in the lifeboat on the relative safety of the deck before the davits could lift the fully loaded lifeboats over the side. 2 of the boats would also be equipped with their own engines and wireless. After 27 months on the slipway, Britannic was finally ready for launching on the 26th of February 1914. This was only 1 month longer than it had taken Titanic to reach the launching stage. Continuing a long-standing White Star tradition, the occasion demanded a glittering guest list, including the company bigwigs, Admiralty officials, and local Belfast dignitaries. But for all that, there was no real launching ceremony as such. There was no White Star tradition of breaking a bottle of champagne on the ship's bow. The first rocket was fired at 11:10 a.m. to signal the workmen to knock away the few remaining blocks supporting the keel. The rocket also warned any vessels on the river to stand clear. As the second rocket was fired at 11:15 a.m, the triggers were released, and needing no assistance from the hydraulic rams, Britannic's grey-painted hull moved down the slipway. The passage made easier by over 20 tons of tallow, train oil and soft soap. "81 seconds later, having reached a speed of 9.5 knots,
Join large-scale battles with military vehicles. The online action game War Thunder has received a major...
Britannic was afloat. Following the launch, the dignitaries retired to Belfast's Grand Central Hotel for the customary speeches and lunch. But for the shipyard workers there was no time for any such diversions. Like any other Thursday, they had a great deal of work to get done before they would be allowed home. Not least the prospect of clearing the now empty slip number 2, in preparation for Harland and Wolff's next contract, the Red Star liner Nederland. For Britannic, the immediate future involved another 6 months alongside the deep water fitting out wharf. But if everything went according to plan, then with luck she could still be in service by the late autumn. When Britannic had been launched, it was anticipated that she would enter service in September 1914.
Hold on. What is venue set? Reset. Hold on, everyone. Sorry, folks. Someone tried to try their shift with me. Venue reset. I'm not doing that bullshit.
When Britannic had been launched, it was anticipated that she would enter service in September 1914. In July 1914, it was announced that Britannic would not be ready for her maiden voyage until the spring of 1915. History, however, had other plans.
Yeah.
And during the summer of 1914, the pillars that had kept the peace in Europe for almost 100 years began to fall. On the 28th of June 1914, the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo. But hostilities did not really begin until 1 month later, when Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia on the 28th of July. Great Britain had initially hoped to remain on the sidelines. But when Russia sided with Serbia, and Germany declared its support for Austria, France declared its support for Russia. And when Germany marched into neutral Belgium on the 4th of August, in violation of the Treaty of London, Britain's guarantee of Belgian neutrality left the British government with no alternative but to declare war on Germany. Neutrality left the British government with no alternative.
So that's how Britannic was. So that's why Britannic had joined in the war. Because Russia and also people in Germany was probably fighting with the British Army too.
But to declare war on Germany. The impact of hostilities was no less apparent at Belfast. Harland and Wolff was not in the business of building warships, and with the majority of war materials suddenly diverted to shipyards with admiralty contracts, there was little option but to slow the work on many civil contracts. Work on Britannic was still far enough advanced by September 1914 for the ship to be placed in the Thompson graving dock in order to have her propellers fitted. Britannic was simply not seen as priority, as there was little call for a ship of her size.
Well, I want to stop right here, and then part 2 is coming. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you're new to your channel, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. And new videos are coming out next week. Stop right here, and then